Greetings, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and right now I'll be presenting during the next 20 minutes the fresh update on the battle map situation here in Ukraine, on Russian-Ukrainian war, and the situation as of July the 4th. So please join and watch this video, like it, share it, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also leave your comments below the video. I'll start with some achievements which have been gained by armed forces of Ukraine during the last few days. So let's make some short overview of those achievements and then move on to the fresh situation, what is going right now today on the battlefield. Let's start.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Let's begin with the strikes that were carried out the day before. The settlement of Kharkiv has been occupied since 2014, that is, since the time of the ATO and JFO, and is a settlement east of Donetsk, east of Makivka. The day before, it was hit very, very noticeably. Even the Russians themselves wrote in their public channels that supposedly the Chochols used tactical nuclear weapons. That's what some channels wrote, actually, some quite popular ones, because the strikes there were extremely powerful. And as for Kharkiv, confirmation finally came out yesterday from the general staff that it was SBU drones that struck the Russian army's ammunition depots in the village of Veliko Rikove near Kharkiv. Kharkiv itself holds significant logistical and strategic importance because the Russians use it as a major rear base. There, the enemy has set up command posts, logistics centers, ammunition depots, and storage facilities for fuel and lubricants. That's why I've repeatedly said that the best chance to gain an advantage in Donbass, or at least to level the situation, if not to talk about gaining the upper hand, then at least to even things out in Don bases to destroy the enemy's logistics. And now, thank God, we have long-range strike capabilities with a range of at least up to 200 kilometers. And there are quite a few of them, and the enemy's air defense has been weakened, so we can reach our targets. That's why, for example, yesterday there was a strike on Kharkiv. Not yesterday, sorry, but during the night before last there was a strike. Yesterday, the place that was hit was Luhansk. In broad daylight, during the so-called exhibition of achievements by the fighters of the special military operation, specifically honoring Operation Truba. Operation Truba, let me remind you, is a suicidal operation by the Russians when they crawled through a gas pipeline near Suja in the Kursk region, and about 600 Russians simply suffocated right inside the pipe, but they glorify it and celebrate it as a huge achievement of the Russian army. Accordingly, in Luhansk, they gathered at the local history museum to celebrate at an exhibition about the so-called special military operation and Operation Truba. And that's where our strike hit. This kind of video appeared on social media yesterday. It shows the exact site of the strike and the destruction. After the strike occurred, it became known that the former so-called mayor of Luhansk under the occupation authorities was killed, one of the traitors, one of Igor Plotnitsky's associates, one of the ideologists, and ultimately one of the main ideologists of the so-called Luhansk People's Republic. And yesterday, as reported, our people, here once again, the Security Service of Ukraine eliminated him. In addition, to use a term everyone understands in Ukrainian, let's say, frontline terminology, eliminated means kill the Russian brigade commander, the former commander of the 155th Marine Brigade here in the Sumy region, or rather near Sumy, in the Kursk region, in the settlement of Korenevo, as they say. This Major General Mikhail Gudkov was eliminated. He was already a former. He is now a former. Well, I mean, he was, yes, I'm already getting confused with the words. He was the former commander of the 155th Brigade of Russian Marines of the Pacific Fleet, the very same brigade that just during the full-scale invasion has completely renewed its personnel about 4 times completely. And since March of this year, 2025, this Major General Gudkov became the deputy commander of the Russian Federation's Navy, and now our forces eliminated him right there. In Korenevo, this is yet another loss among the Russian command. Let me remind you that just a week ago in the Donetsk region, almost the entire command of the 8th Combined Arms Army, which is conducting the offensive in the Pokrovsk and Toretsk directions, was also completely eliminated. There, the acting commander of this army was killed. and up to 10 people from the staff were also killed, meaning a missile struck somewhere there. This is war. You see, unfortunately, yesterday we buried Serhiy Zakharevich, the commander of the 110th Mechanized Brigade. As we know, just recently on the 1st of July, there was a strike at the location where a meeting was being held. The brigade commander himself was killed, his deputy for logistics was killed, and the chief of staff was also killed. All of them were buried yesterday. Unfortunately, such a tragic situation has befallen our 110th Mechanized Brigade. But in the same way, we also locate, track down, and strike not just Russian brigade commanders, but even entire operational command leaders and deputies branches and types of troops, such as the deputy commander of the naval forces of the Russian Federation, this Major General Gudkov. In addition to this, among the significant and noteworthy achievements of recent days, let's say, just yesterday, it was officially and definitively confirmed by the General Staff that in the Lipetsk region here is the prominent city of Lipetsk, and here is the nearby town of Yelets. Highly effective and precise drones successfully struck in Yelets, specifically targeting a crucial industrial plant known as Energia, which is a vital facility. And this Energia plant is extremely important for the Russian Federation because it is one of the most critical points of the Russian military-industrial complex. This plant is located right there. They manufacture batteries there. These are very specific such components. Batteries for the planning and correction units of missiles, for the planning and correction of missiles, the so-called UMPK, the Universal Planning and Correction Module. This is a kind of kit, let's put it simply, wings and the navigation system that are attached to Russian unguided aerial bombs. And these unguided aerial bombs are turned into guided corrected aerial bombs, that is CABs, which cause us a lot of trouble at the front. Accordingly, a strike was carried out on the batteries for these UMPK module units in Yelets. These same batteries are also used for the Iskander ballistic missile system and the cruise missiles of the Russian Federation. In other words, this is an extremely important facility that was attacked by our long-range drones. However, first and foremost, I will repeat myself once again. I am pleased that our drones, our long-range systems, and possibly our missile drone shape started to target frontline logistics, and this is an obvious reality. This did not exist before, and now it has appeared. In addition, yesterday there was a phenomenal report from the Southern Defense Forces regarding an incident in Crimea near Cape Tarkhankut, in the vicinity of a settlement I forgot the name, but never mind. In the significant area of Cape Tarkhankut, which is located on the western coast of Crimea, there was a precise strike on some very important Russian systems, specifically those known as NIBO-M. These are radar stations, and it wasn't just a single one that our forces destroyed, but three entire radar stations. These radar stations are extremely rare, and according to some reports, as of October 2024, the Russian Federation had only about 10 of them. One was reportedly hit by ATACMS, and imagine that, friends, 3 at once were destroyed literally overnight, from the 1st of July to 2nd by our drones. Of course, we won't go into the details of how exactly this was done. What makes this NIBO-M system unique? Well, aside from the fact that there were only 10 of them in Russia in total, and now there are 6 left at best, and aside from the fact that they are extremely expensive, costing about $100 million each, so in one night our drones destroyed occupiers' equipment worth $300 million. This is also, such a multifunctional, as it's called, radar complex that detects aerodynamic and ballistic objects at medium and high altitudes. What does this mean? These are the eyes of the Russian air defense system, which are supposed to detect missiles, drone missiles, ballistic threats, and potentially detect and relay targeting information to Russian air defense assets. We are systematically blinding them in Crimea. In general, a tremendous amount of work has been happening in Crimea lately, all across the peninsula. Let me remind you about the Seiki airfield, which was targeted by security service drones. Let me also remind you about the airfield near Primorsky, where 3 enemy helicopters were destroyed, along with 1 anti-aircraft missile station and 1 Pansir-S, 1 anti-aircraft missile and gun system. Let me also remind you finally about the strike in the Kerch area. Let me remind you of the ongoing operations on the western coast of Crimea by our naval drones and the Primara unit, which launched FPVs from these naval drones to destroy enemy S-300, S-400, Buk, and fancier missile systems of these are being destroyed by drones. In other words, Crimea is now essentially turning into a kind of great Kornobaevka, legendary village in the Kherson region, where at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the Russians supplied and stored a lot of various equipment at the Chornobaevka airfield, and this equipment was simply being completely destroyed. It was simply disappearing into a black hole. The same thing is happening with Crimea now. Seriously, just imagine in a single night, 3 out of the 10 that actually existed in the Russian Federation, 3 costly and extremely important radar stations were destroyed. These are essentially the critically important eyes for the Russian Federation. And all of these, friends, all of it is in fact a direct consequence of the fact that Russia's air defense is getting worse and worse. Because this systematic destruction of radar stations, missile launchers, all of it is yielding significant results. Since now, as we can see, the factories are no longer being protected. Some facilities, unless they're in Moscow, are left unprotected. Our drones and missiles are reaching their targets very calmly and confident. If before only a few would make it through and there were just occasional reports of our drones reaching their targets, now in February, missiles and drones are flying in and not being shot down. There isn't enough air defense in the Russian Federation. It's being systematically and effectively taken out, especially in Crimea, which is an extremely important military base. That's why the Russians are constantly supplying it with new air defense systems. And now, even in Crimea, it has basically become a kill zone, essentially a continuous kill zone. And these are simply excellent news for us in the south. In addition, regarding the south, I also want to add that I admire the work of our defense forces in destroying logistics in the south. In destroying logistics, and I firmly and persistently state the fact that this very destruction, which we are now witnessing in logistics, the work on railways, the work on locomotives, the work on fuel trucks, their destruction of this is being carried out to the maximum extent. Just yesterday, there was another such case. The Department of Active Operations of the main intelligence directorate there is such a very effective department that works specifically in the southern direction. They reported on a month-long operation targeting the positions of Russian pilots, because pilots are currently the main strike resource, both ours and ultimately the enemy's. So the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, DIU, launched such an operation in the south of the Zaporizhia region called Dronocide. As a result of this operation, 90 enemy positions and residences of drone operators, both strike and reconnaissance drones, were identified in the Zaporizhia region. Out of these 90 identified positions, as of today, 42 targets have already been destroyed or damaged. All of this is the result of joint efforts in the south by the main intelligence directorate, the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade, the 128th Territorial Defense Brigade, the Flight School Unit of the Unmanned Systems Forces, as well as the Zaporizhia Operational Tactical Group and the Tavria Operational Strategic Group. This is the official report from the main intelligence directorate regarding this work. So, as we mentioned earlier, it is necessary to organize hunts, essentially hunting down enemy UAV operators. Now, this has turned into a systematic effort, and it is being implemented extremely effectively and actively in the Zaporizhia direction. What remains is to successfully transfer this same experience from Zaporizhia to Donetsk region in the same way. And then, it will be much, or at least easier, to stop the enemy's advance. By the way, let's talk about the north, about Sumy region. We haven't talked about it for a long time. Just yesterday, I was in contact with our fighters who say that, in fact, along the entire line of combat engagement, the armed forces of Ukraine are having successes. So a kind of counteroffensive is underway here. To the north of Andriivka, our fighters managed to advance, and east of Yablonivka, also to the southeast of Yunakivka, they managed to gain. That's not right. The last arrow I drew like this. Our fighters have recently achieved success there. I'm actually quoting my comrade who is fighting in the Sumy direction. He writes to me, Mr. Vasyl, we have good news. We've pushed them back a bit. Well, you know what they call the Russians? We've pushed the Nidas back a bit, as my acquaintance says, practically along the entire line of the Sumy region. But there is also bad news regarding Sumy region. The Russians have once again turned their active attention to it. Previously, they used to redeploy their most advanced units from here, especially their best UAV operators, such as Rubicon. This is a unit that is highly skilled with both fiber optic drones and, in general, conventional classic drones. But they started out here in Sumy region, initially operating during the Kursk operation. Later, a significant number of them were relocated to Pokrovsk. Now, Pokrovsk is returning to Sumy region again because our troops have started to achieve successes here. And these Rubicon units have, in fact, returned and will try to make life more difficult for us. As expected, the enemy has now, in addition to Sumy region, also stepped up its actions, possibly involving Rubicon units as well in the northern Kharkiv front. Let me remind you about the northern Slobozhansky direction, because our general staff has divided these into two directions. They call the Sumy direction the northern Slobozhansky and the Kharkiv direction the southern Slobozhansky. That's how they made this distinction. So over the past 2 days in the southern Slobozhansky direction, there has been a significant increase and intensification of combat activity, actually moving it to the second place in terms of priority. This direction is even surpassing the Novopavlivka direction because the enemy has intensified combat operations in the area of Vovchansk itself. Up to 10 combat engagements per day are now taking place here directly in the Vovchansk area. In addition, the enemy has begun, the adversary, more active combat operations in this appendix between the Vovchansk and Kupiansk directions. As expected, it was entirely predictable that the enemy would attempt an offensive here with the aim of reaching the free settlements of Bili Kolodias, Perekolotne, and Veliki Burluk, which are essentially logistical hubs in this direction, serving as a kind of connecting line between Vovchansk and Dvorishna, as well as Kupiansk. In fact, we can say so. Therefore, in the direction of this sector, it is undoubtedly expected that the Russians will launch offensives here on our southern Slobozhansky front. And now they have begun such offensives, we can say that, in fact, a fresh new front has been opened in the direction of this settlement, Milov. This is right on the border, a border as direct as you can imagine. Here, the Russians have already reported that supposedly they hung their Aquafresh, their rag, on a high-rise building in Milov. It's clear that there are no stable positions on the border here. People do not live here. And so, as always, the Russians started making TikTok videos at a distance of about 200 meters from the demarcation line of our border. They climbed up onto this high-rise, waved their flags. I basically explained yesterday how all of this happens. This is a very typical scenario, a common story for the modern battlefield. The Russians rush into some location, film themselves with a drone, then the recording cuts off. The flag supposedly keeps flying. The Russians flee, trying to hide from drone strikes. Those who are lucky survive, those who aren't are drones destroy. And basically, that's how it goes along the entire line of contact. Right now, here on the southern Slobozhansky direction in Milov, the Russians try to attack this new point on the border. Besides that, there is ongoing movement, unfortunately not very pleasant and actually threatening for the defense forces. On the Kostiantinivka direction, the enemy, having so far failed to break the resistance in Yablunivka, is now moving around it toward the settlement of Stepanivka. In the past few days, we've seen minor advances toward the settlement, and we can confirm and observe these as well. In my understanding, the enemy's further movement will not even be toward Kostiantinivka, but rather further on toward the area of Druzhkivka, Oleksivka, Druzhkivka, with the aim of cutting off Kostiantinivka. That is, the Russians understand that attacking such significant, well-fortified defensive positions head-on like Yablunivka, Shkerbinivka, or Kostiantinivka is very costly and very difficult for them. That's why it's better for them to attack from the flank. Although on the flank, no one is ruling out the possibility that Druzhkivka or Alexievo Druzhkivka are weaker strong points than, say, Kostiantinivka. But unfortunately, the long range of drones allows them to cut off these logistics, and the situation in the Kostiantinivka direction continues to remain, actually quite difficult. In the same way, the Russians are trying to break through on the flank, or rather, they actually have successful advances in the areas of Koptove and Rozin. This advance is aimed at the flank of our important defensive position, Novokonomichne, in the Pokrovsk-Mirnorad agglomeration. This is the kind of movement they have carried out now. However, ahead of them lie very difficult lines for assaults. Rodinske, Krasny Lyman, the heights, and water obstacles in this direction. Therefore, I don't think they will achieve significant advances. But every meter of advance, especially concerning the logistics routes, is of course a significant threat to our forces. And the same flanking threats exist in the direction of, for example, Velika Novosilka. Here, ultimately, you can see this large gray zone towards the settlements of Voskreshenka and Pidubne, if we're talking about the north. Here is Pidubne, and here in Voskreshenka, the Russians are systematically breaking through, trying to create something like an encirclement in this area around Peribudova, Komar, and Mirn for our troops. They are reaching Voskreshenka. There are their videos. They have achieved some successes, but so far they have not managed to capture it. So flanking threats, they continue to be a major problem for our troops. Everywhere we see that the Russians are incapable of attacking head-on, but in the end, they don't need to. They try to come in through the flanks, striking at logistics. That is why in modern warfare, more than ever before, ground robotic systems are coming to the forefront. These are things I believed in a year ago, and now I am even more convinced in my belief and urge all of you, dear friends, to actively support the fundraising efforts of our soldiers and volunteers for ground robotic systems. Because nothing and no one handles this complicated logistics better than the Dovhan drones are flying. Ground robotic drones allow us to save not just individual soldiers, but entire units. So please donate, support the defense forces, and support this video with your likes, comments, and subscriptions. All the best. See you next time.